an integrated development platform that's completely visual. Now, in the industry in the US, they call that genre low code, no code. You can think of it as low code, no code, or you can think of it as a platform that helps build front to back everything, the UI, the objects, the database, the business logic, without writing a single line of code. So you drag and drop and pretty much build your whole application. And in the end, what you get is a perfectly designed monolith MVC N-tier application. Let's take a look at that. So I wanted to start off with this slide to kind of explain what gave us the need to build this, this particular platform. If you look at the software evolution from the 1950s, so COBOL was really the first commercial software programming language that was built. So they were functional languages, which means there was no structure. So variables were like spread out throughout the program and so on and so forth. Then people decided, okay, we need to carry structure around programming. So for example, if a person's details was passed around, instead of just passing around first name, last name, middle name separately, they said, why don't we create a structure called person, put those three variables in there, and then pass that person object, or you know, what we modern days call it class, or you know, instanced object around. That then changed to, why don't we even pass around the functionality behind that structure with it? So that created object-oriented programming languages. So one of the things that object-oriented programming languages was supposed to bring in to the programming world was domain-driven design. In other words, build your software to mimic the business that you're trying to write code for, rather than a technical way to build it. So instead of building the application that follows a screen, you build the application that follows the business. But what happened was there were other issues like HTML wasn't, you know, object-oriented, CSS and JavaScript, they weren't object-oriented. Database wasn't object-oriented. People were mainly using relational databases. So the domain-driven design really never took off. Now people were still designing their applications based off of screens. And that's the web languages era that we came into. So I kind of wanted to put in terms of time perspective, my previous company that I had started and hence sold to Oracle, and kind of shown you like the type of clients that we dealt with, pretty much large, some of the largest companies in the world, to kind of give you an idea of the lessons that we learned in installing massive enterprise application in these companies. Kind of set us up to really look at how large enterprise software is being written in the modern world and how do we bring change to it. During that time, in the late 2000s, there was a kind of a split in the way software was being built. If you take COBOL, you can sit in front of a mainframe dumb terminal and build the whole application. You can build the UI, even though it's a green screen dot matrix UI. You built the data model, you built the business logic. Everything was done with one language. But by the late 2000s, you needed several languages. You needed HTML, you needed CSS, you needed JavaScript, you needed Java or C#, you needed SQL for data access. So now all of a sudden you needed 5 skill sets to build one good business web application. So obviously programmers are looking for better, faster ways to create stuff. So along with the V8, which is the Node.js platform, they said, okay, we know we are going to write JS for the front end. There's now a platform to write Node.js in the back end. So why don't we get rid of languages, structured object-oriented languages like C# or Java in the back end, and use JavaScript? Again, similarly, languages like Node and Python came into existence, which expedited software development. People were now very quickly able to build, applications using these scripting languages. Along with them came a lot of risks. Python, PHP, Node.js, they're open source languages, so there's a huge amount of security flaws in them. If you have a PHP server, chances are some hacker is using your PHP server to mine Bitcoin, for instance. Another problem with these languages were they were immature. In other words, they were not type-driven. A variable can contain integer, string, date, whatnot throughout the whole program that you're writing. There was no object-oriented programming, no inheritance and things like that. And obviously, they're not scalable because they're not compiled. They're interpreted languages. So how did the world mitigate these three issues? One, they put billions of dollars into cybersecurity. They brought in a lot of security stuff into the language instead of being in the infrastructure level. The right way to build a good application is keep majority of the security in the infrastructure level and only bring in what's necessary in the application. That went out the window. Now you had to really code for security within your code, things like cross-origin and stuff like that. How do you now, you can't really write massive monolith applications anymore because of the immaturity of the languages. How did people solve that? Well, they started writing things in small little pieces, expose them as web services, and then they would deploy all of them, together and so on. So you end up with a lot of maintenance issues. And to solve that problem, they came up with a concept called microservices in DevOps. So even in certain cases where microservices in DevOps is not a good fit, people were forcing them in because they were using these languages in the back end. How did they solve the object-oriented problem? Well, they started having layer abstractions. They brought in, things like jQuery or EXTJS, React, Angular, and so on and so forth. But every 6 months, you get a new platform that says it's a better way to write JavaScript. And so people had to constantly keep updating their skill sets. So now the world, instead of solving business problems, is slowly turning into a resume-driven, I need to get that on my resume, kind of issue. And finally, the scalability issue, they just started adding hardware. The cloud hardware was so massive that solved the scalability problem. So nobody cared about writing software that actually ran faster because your hardware kind of took care of that business. So we decided, and of course we have a couple of competitors, a certain group of people decided to take software development in a different approach. What we said was we will keep the design principles that are very important in building a good software in a different approach. We'll keep the design principles, but still give just one tool where you sit in front of one tool, you learn one tool, but that tool will generate everything that you need for full stack development. One of the side benefits we saw out of that was that we were able to build applications 3 times faster with 70% savings in cost. And hopefully for the rest of the meeting, you will see that you will get that value out of Graphite. How do you build applications with Graphite? So you build your object model. Again, it's domain-driven design. So you build your object model, not worry about the data model, and build the object model to follow the business that you're solving. So if you're at an insurance company, build the object model to mimic the business. If you're at a manufacturing company, build the object model to follow whatever the product that's manufactured. If you're at a bank, build the object model for accounts and, withdrawals and deposits and things like that. Then you build all your business logic in the form of flowcharts. So literally, you'll see as I'm doing logic in the first webinar here, I will be drawing it in the form of flowcharts. And then UI, you drag and drop widgets in this palette, and you'll see a live preview here. And when you see this preview, it is guaranteed to be responsive. And behind the scenes, what happens is when you push, so let's say you built your objects, you built your business logic, you built your screen. From the screen, you call your business logic to get things done. After that, when you push a build button, you generate perfectly designed MVC, N-tier Visual Studio projects, one for the web and one for the backend business logic, which we will take a look at today. You can expose these flowcharts as SOAP and REST, which we will also take a look at today. The database that is generated is automatically generated by Graphite. It follows the code-first methodology. It generates a perfect third normal form database, and it generates it in SQL Server. The front end is in plain HTML, it's in plain CSS, and plain JavaScript. So we don't use any platforms or any abstraction layers and things like that, mainly because of performance. As you add layers, you obviously take a hit in the performance. In the future, Graphite is going to be supporting Oracle, MySQL. It's going to be supporting, it's going to be generating a Java stack. .NET Core is coming up in the next release, and we'll also be generating native code. But right now, it generates a web application that is built using the Microsoft technologies. So Graphite is just not a code generator. It is a complete platform. Out of the box, you have multi-currency, multi-language support. So if you have an application that's written in English, I'm talking about the screens and stuff like that. If you want to make it available in any other language, let's say Hindi, Marathi or Telugu or whatever, it literally takes minutes to convert that application into that language. We'll take a look at that as well. Version control, you can connect to Azure DevOps or locally in TFS to have multiple people working on the working in that. So I'm sorry, I'm just seeing that someone can't listen to the audio. Sagar, let me know if you want me to stop and solve that problem. Meanwhile, I'll continue. So there's a nice little debugger, which I'll show you when I'm demoing the platform. One very important thing that was coming out of academic institutions that do software research, especially MIT, which we follow very closely, is this concept called smart refactoring. So when you make any destructive change in your code, most IDEs are pretty bad in telling you these are all the other things that will be affected by this change. Visual Studio does a pretty good job, but still not the best. Graphite does a complete analysis of the whole project, show you every element that has a problem, and will automatically fix whatever it can. We'll ask you to fix other stuff that it cannot automatically do, and basically we'll let you commit the changes once you have taken care of all that. Service API, like I said earlier, you can expose and consume web services. I will show you exposing the web services today, and we'll talk about consuming in the next webinar. Testing Manager, there's a really good testing harness inside Graphite that can be used to test all your business logic. Again, we'll take a look at that in one of the future webinars. But one of the main things about Graphite is Graphite generates all the security features that needs to make a perfect, secure, highly secure web applications by incorporating all of these security features without the developer worrying about it. So you get into Graphite and you build an application. Sorry, is someone scribbling on the screen here? Anyway, let me continue. So you just concentrate on building the application, and Graphite will take care of all the security needs. So one of the most important advantages of Graphite is, as compared to other platforms that do low code, no code, as the industry is called, are these three things. Majority of the other platforms, when you use them, whatever objects you write or your logic you write or UI you write stays in their cloud platform. But Graphite, since you download Graphite, you install it on your laptop, and you build the applications, all the stuff that you do is in your hands. When you push build, you also, sorry, one second. When you build the platform, the source code that's generated is also in your hand. So you can open up the source code and you can actually look at the source code and see its quality. And then again, you can deploy it anywhere. You can deploy it on your machine. You can deploy it on Azure. You can deploy it on AWS. You can deploy it on Bluemix, whatever cloud platform that you like. In fact, since the code is in your hands, you can manually open it up in Visual Studio and right-click and publish it to whichever platform that on-prem servers, for instance, whatever you want to pretty much do. So that's pretty much the presentation. We're gonna now take a look at the platform. So I'm gonna stop the share and reshare it with my virtual machine. Give me a second here. So a few things that I want to talk about Graphite before I jump into the platform is some of the resources that you have access to Graphite. So here is, I'm going to go to the website. This is the Graphite website. But the thing that you want to look at Graphite website is in here, try it for free. Here you have two things that you want to download. You want to download the actual platform, and then you want to download the system libraries, so what we call the core libraries. So you have to install this, and then you'll have to also install this. Then you got these two documents here. You got the system requirements documents. You need about 8 to 16 gig because the platform runs on your machine. You know, some of the tools that I use for myself that I find very useful is Notepad++, grep, win, obviously beyond compare and stuff like that. May not be needed for you guys, but those are things, tools that I find very useful. And then you got the install notes. Because Graphite relies on some of the Microsoft components, and because of the way your laptop is set up, they may not automatically get installed. So this install notes will give you a bunch of information about if you get build errors or install errors. It will show you what the problem is, and it'll tell you how to solve that. Obviously, you guys can use our support as well to fix that. When you enter Graphite, when you try to run the installer, it'll ask you a bunch of information. For the Graphite Studio Challenge, please enter Graphite Studio Challenge here on how did you hear about us. So when you ask for support, we know we can send you to the right support team. And you can register Graphite. If you don't register, you get 30 days. And after 30 days, Graphite will not work. So all you have to do is register. There's no cost for it. I'm also going to show you after 30 days how to keep extending your trial when we look at the platform. So that's to talk about the installation. There's another website here called the Knowledge Center. So in the Knowledge Center, there's a bunch of stuff in here, but the main area that you should be interested in is the references. So what you get here is a whole bunch of documents that will help you through learning Graphite. but I highly recommending reading the Graphite Studio Beginner Guide. If you push open, it actually will open up the document. And of course, you can download it, save it on your hard drive, and so on. It's a PDF document, so if you don't have internet, you can still open it and read it. There are 4 chapters here that will actually show you all the different features of Graphite. And you can pretty much go through this. There are portions in Graphite where you have this table, or you will have, let me show you quickly here, a warning boxes that will explain some of the things that you will need. Here's the one example. The first shape you add to the decision shape is always the true condition. So you want to thoroughly read this document if you want to really understand the concepts, and basically it's going to be highly useful to build applications very, very quickly in Graphite. Otherwise, you'll be asking for a lot of support questions, which may waste a lot of your time. So here, things like this are very important. So not only will you understand how to use Graphite well, but the whole concepts behind Graphite on how to write good applications. There's a lot of problems in the software world right now where people want to write quick and dirty applications, but quality takes a huge hit. Graphite's main reason is to solve that problem, and a lot of this information in this document will help you with that. Other than that, you got the system requirements document, the reserved words. There's a concept called page instructions in Graphite. This will help you figure out all the different page instructions and so on and so forth. Here's a one called files and folders. This document will tell you where's the generated code, what are all the config files behind Graphite, and so on and so forth. That could be highly useful. Coming back to the Knowledge Center, this area will talk about all the different shapes in the flowchart. This will talk about all the available view elements. So for example, if I go to form, group, you will see that a drop down is called select field here. And here you'll get a description of it. And here are all the different properties and what they are. And where can you add a select field? You can add it to a field set, and you can add it to an editable display item, and so on and so forth. Then you got the different libraries. So when you download and install this second item, what you get is you get all these libraries that are available for you to use. The core library is the main library that you will need. So think of it as like system libraries that you would get when you're programming in Java or C#. It itself comes with certain entities or class files. So with properties, and here's a description of some of that stuff. Here's the user object. Here are the methods that are inside the user object. We use the term entities, properties, and behaviors because in domain-driven design, those are the terms that are being used, and we want to use those technical terminology instead of calling it classes and methods and things like that. But one very important section, or the two last important sections, are the sample project section. So you can literally download a project. So you can just click on this. And what you get is you don't get the application. You actually get the whole project that gets installed in your, and when you run the installer, it actually installs it. And I'm going to show you where Graphite installs its projects and things like that when I get into the platform. And then finally, the video tutorials. If you go into video tutorials, it takes you to YouTube, and you have a playlist here that over time, we're going to be adding more and more videos. So you can come back here and take a look at the new videos about Graphite. So that's kind of like the resources. Obviously, you have the Incubate Hub chat, the Code Challenge chat to ask all your questions. With that, let's start building a web application. What I'm going to do today is a web application where we're going to create an entity, which is equivalent to a class. We're going to add a behavior, which is equivalent to a method. So think of it as a public method in that class. We are going to build a web page, which, we're going to build a view, which is called a web page, which is equivalent to a web page. We're going to build a view behavior, view controller behavior, which is when you push a button, this is the behavior that gets called, which will then call this behavior. We're going to then add an environment. So it'll tell you where to deploy that application that we have built. We're going to create a database. Well, we're going to do a build. We're going to build and create the code. We're going to create the database and run that application. So let's get started. So I'm going to run Graphite. Obviously, I have a couple of versions that I'm constantly working on. When you double click on Graphite, it opens up the platform. If there's no project you've been working on before, it will take you to the new and open screen. When you click on new, it takes you to this screen where you can build a library for reuse, which we will see in the webinars coming up. But in this case, we're building a web application. And here's where you give the company name. So for Code Challenge, you can simply say Code Challenge or Incubate Hub or whatnot. And then here's where the application the name that you're building, so the project name. So I'll call this calculator. And because we're going to simply build an interest rate calculator, so just for our particular sample here. And here's where you can set up the config file, can set up a lot of locations. Graphite by default sets up these two locations. Basically, there's that maps to a place in your hard drive, which I'll show you with the config file. And this is, if you want to build a project with the data model, you can have it as yes. If you don't want a data model behind the scenes, maybe you're consuming just web services that are exposed by, let's say, Amazon or Azure, then you don't need your data model. You can just set that to no. In this case, we're going to create a database, so I'm going to set that to yes. And these are all the data libraries that are available for me. The only library that you need to build any small application is just Core. But here are other ones. If you want to put a calendar control, you have Planner. If you want to send email, you have messaging. If you want to do file upload, download, you have media. If you have if you're dealing with addresses, you can use this library. And libraries can also have multiple locales. You know, so for India addresses, you would do this. For US addresses, you would do this. Or you can use, obviously, both if you need to handle multiple addresses. So experiment with that. Obviously, use the Knowledge Center sample projects to see how those are being used. In this case, I'm going to push next. When I push next, Graphite now shows all the components that are being used in Graphite. So if you had used multiple libraries and they had multiple different entities, it would have shown them in different categories. You can uncheck them and check them as you need them. So I'm going to click OK. And this is the home page for the project. So that's the name of our project, name of the group, name of the project. This gray location icon says that the project is on my hard drive. If it is green, it means that it's on like some kind of a source control, either Azure DevOps or TFS, which we have support for right now. And this is the location of the project. This blue box is what we call a category. Think of it as a domain. So like I said earlier, if you're building an application for a bank, you may have one domain called member, where you'll have all the information about the member. You may have one called account, where you'll have all the information about account. You may have one called loans, and you can handle all the loan objects in that, and so on and so forth. All the elements of the core library that we included ends up in this particular common category. If you, by looking at the icon, you'll know what each one of these artifacts within that category is. So here you have, sorry, I'm going to show you. So these are all the different icons. So that means it's a class file. That is an enumeration. If you see that, it's a query service. Query service is raw SQL you can type into Graphite that you can call from within your flowcharts. This is when you're consuming a web service. This is when you're consuming a DLL directly from Graphite. So you can write handwritten code outside of Graphite, which we will see in one of the webinars, that you can consume within Graphite. So for things that in rare cases Graphite doesn't do, you can write regular code and then basically call it from within Graphite. This is a data contract. So data contract is nothing but an entity that does not need to get saved to the database. A view is your web page. An element pack is a collection of widgets that keep repeating in every page. You'll create an element pack and reuse. So now with that, let's go create our first category. I'm going to call this financial. Coding standard wise, in case you guys are wondering what are the things that we will be looking for during the competition, we will be not just looking for how great the application functions. Behind the scenes, we're going to be looking for good programming standards within Graphite. So for example, we don't support, we does support camel case, but we support Hungarian notation. So beginning everything with a capital letter will get you some extra points. So naming everything properly, no X's and Y's and stuff like that, no abbreviations. So those are things that will make sure that you'll get more points to win the competition. So here's a financial. As you'll notice throughout, I'll never be using any abbreviation. I will qualify my variables, but you know, by managing the length so I don't have to type a lot, but at the same time making it very clear. So I created a new category. There is nothing obviously in that category. So first thing I'm going to do is create an entity. Once again, an entity is nothing but a class file. So I click on entity and it asks me for a name. I can inherit. So true object-oriented programming exists in Graphite. So I can inherit, so person, I can inherit employee. I can do things like that. But in this case, I'm not inheriting anything. So I'm creating a base class called interest, and it creates it in a category called financial, which happens to be already created. So here is interest. So as you can see, it's an empty class file. You can put properties and methods. We'll worry about all this later. You can set up seed data and things like that. So I'm going to create 4 properties here. So first one is principal. And the data types, obviously there are some default data types like base primitive data types, as well as objects that you create become data types. So I'm going to choose principal as a currency. You can make it a list, and you can make it required or not required. You can make it a relationship. We'll look at these two in a further webinar. Click OK. I'm going to make rate. So as you can see, I just did tab, and did type DE, and it brought in decimal. So Graphite has all the IntelliSense, type ahead features just like any good IDE. So I'm going to add my third one, which is duration. Tab, INT, adds the integer. And then finally, I'm going to add amount, currency. So those are my 4 properties. The great thing about Graphite, at least in my opinion, is that when you're building a complex business application, when you build your object like that, you can bring in a business analyst and show them this stuff. Otherwise, you'll have to show your code, which has IDs and all those complex semicolons and brackets, and usually they get scared. But with Graphite, there you have a nice look and feel. They understand what interest is, and they understand what interest contains. So you get a much better response from people that understand the business. And we find that as a huge advantage for Graphite, where the friction between developers and business analysts completely gets removed. So again, we created a class file. Let's go add a public method. So that's in the behavior section. Obviously, there's no behaviors in this class we just built. We're going to add a behavior. So when I click on the add behavior, it takes you to a place where you will be writing the code behind that public method. So every method has a name or behavior. So I'm going to call this calculate simple interest. Oops, sorry. And it starts you off with the start shape, and using these shapes, you can pretty much write any code that you can build with any good programming language. It starts you off with the start shape, like I said, and if you double click on any shape, it'll open up a dialog box, and that's where you enter the details of the shape. The start shape is used to enter inputs and outputs to this method or behavior. So I'm going to push add, and I'm going to add my first input. Again, tab it, so you can say currency. I can say rate. I'm going to take in another input, duration. And I'm going to send out one output. So I choose output here, and I want to return that whole object that we created, and I want to call this variable name new interest. So I've taken in 3 inputs, returning an output. So first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a create shape. That is like doing a new. I'm going to new the interest object onto the output variable. Because the output variable will be null, I'm creating it memory, and I'm setting its properties from the inputs that I got. So for the rest of the flowchart, we'll be calculating the amount. Let's say we wanted an if statement. So I click on this plus, it shows me all the shapes that are available. I add decision shape, which is my if statement. I double click on this, and here is where I can add whatever, expression that I want. Graphite only will let you do one expression at a time to make sure that your code is easily understandable. So I say principal is less than or equal to 0, and notice how Graphite generates the comment for you. You can override the comment here by clicking that, or most developers don't like adding comments. So if you don't add comments, Graphite generates the comments for you. And not only that, this comment ends up in your generated code as well. So I'm going to add the true condition. I added assign, which is nothing but a simple assignment. So I'm going to take that output variable. Here are its properties, and I'm going to set that to 0. So principal is less than or equal to 0. I'm setting the amount to 0. If not, I'm using the evaluation shape, and this is to do any expression. So I'm going to do print basically PNR by 100, which we have all learned since 7th standard, I would assume. I'm creating a variable here, and here's another evaluation shape. I take the variable that I created, I remove principal from it, and that's going to be my amount. Now I'm going to finish up this flow chart. And this is my method. So just to review, I created a entity or a class file, put four properties in, and put one public method. Now let's move on by clicking on this link to the home page. And here I'm going to create another category. I will call it screens, where I'm going to keep all my UI. And here I'm going to add a web page. So by clicking on add view, I create a web page. And so it takes you to this area where you have all these widgets available that you can drag and drop and build your web page. These things are not tied into Graphite. They come in from libraries. So you can create libraries. You can create your own view elements. You can bring in view elements that you have out there on the web, and so on and so forth. So here, what I'm going to do is give it a name. I'll call it interest page. And here's the title. I'm going to make this page the default view. I'm going to save it. Page itself is divided into header, region, and region can be left or right, and content and footer. But you can split up the page in any different way, because behind the scenes, the HTML follows Flexbox. So I'm going to go to the header, and I'm going to push this plus, and it will show me all the widgets that can go into the header. So again, these are called view elements. Widgets can be an alternate term. So I'm going to add a toolbar. Sorry. Yes, we can have questions in 10 minutes. So here's a toolbar, and I'm going to type something here as the title of the toolbar, and you notice when you double click on this, it expands, and you show the title there. You can also see the HTML that's generated behind the scenes by clicking on this pencil, and it opens up Google Chrome Dev Tools here. So you can see the quality of the HTML. Here, I'm going to quickly add a form because I want to open it up for questions in a few minutes. Here's a form, and here are the properties of that form. So as you add the widgets, you'll see the properties there. And here I'm going to add 2 field sets. And in the field sets, you can add fields. So I'm going to add a currency field to take in the principal, a numeric field to take in the rate in the first field set. And here I'm going to add another numeric field to take in the duration. So if I double click on this, you will see how those fields are there, but they don't have any labels and things like that. So we're going to set up those things. So if I click on currency field, you see its properties. Here is the name of the field. Focus indexes for tabbing. And here I type the name of the label. And you'll notice that the label shows up here. Again, I'm going to go to rate. Tab index 2, label rate, and I can set up a mask. So by default, there's some mask, but there's a document in the references section that, or in the beginner guide that shows you how to use this mask. In this case, I'm going to do 3 decimal places. It's directly editable here, so you can type up the whole thing here if you wanted to. The next one is the duration field. And I'm going to take a number of years, so I'm going to choose the no decimals mask. And in the placeholder, I'm going to do enter number of years. So notice when I do titles or labels, I don't enter spaces. I don't enter the actual thing that I want in my screen or in my web page. I enter keywords. And that's for translation purposes, which we're going to take a look at in a few seconds here. Finally, I'm going to finish this off. So by the way, you can search. I'm going to add a button panel. And in the button panel, I'm going to add a button. And I'm going to call this button calculate button. And again, coding standards. I put the title here and then end it with what type of an element that is. So in my flowchart, I know what I'm dealing with. Focus index is 4 and title is calculate. Save it, and then I'm going to finally, without saving, I'm going to add a heading, and this is where I'm going to store my output, or not store, sorry, should display my output. I can play around with the fonts, make it blue, size 32, make it bold. Importance is whether to write H2. And it says null here. To override the null, I can't do 0 directly because of translation purposes. So I type 0 here, and you'll see 0 show up there. So that's the view. So what we have created is a view and with no translation. So let's go take a look at translations. So this page looks good except for this and this. So when I go back to the home page, right, and if I go to edit languages, the default language out of the box is English. So here are all those titles and labels that we put in. For US English, we can type the translation. And this is where I type the translation. When I go back to the page, and if I recycle the page or refresh the page, you will see the actual translations show up on the screen. Now, let's say you wanted to add Hindi, for instance. This is how easy it is. So I go to the language enumeration. Default is English. So here I add Hindi. Save it. Now when I go back to the home page and I go back to languages, in the drop down I'll have Hindi. All I have to do is enter the translations for Hindi here, and you should be able to see the application in Hindi. So very quickly, I'm gonna go get some Hindi translations that I already downloaded from Google Chrome. It doesn't directly connect to Google Chrome for a lot of different reasons. So I'm gonna actually copy and paste it here. And you will see that your page is now available in Hindi. Real quick. And I'm going to finish it off with rate and 0.00 because in Hindi 0 is represented that way. Now, if I open up the page, it's still going to show up in English at design time. The user entity, suppose if we had a login screen, the user entity has a property called language. So when someone logs in, it automatically changes. But at design time, you can go to settings. And settings a dialog takes a little bit because it communicates with our license server, so bear with that. Now, if I go to the View tab here, I can change the language at design time, so to Hindi. And now if I recycle the page, it'll show up in Hindi. So at design time, you can make sure all your screens look good in whatever language that you're developing. Sagar, I want to take a quick break and see if you guys have more time for me to finish up the sample application and open up for questions, or open it up for questions now and finish this project in the next webinar.
Okay. Okay. If you want anyone who has some clarification that is required, you can ping me on chat, or else we'll move ahead with the same. We are building an application. We'll go forward for doing that again.
I had a question.
Yes, please.
So my name's Alok. I just wanted to know that this is of a specific application that is being designed. What's the vision? In the sense, what are the kind of applications that have been designed? I don't want to calculate simple interest, but what's possible in this software?
Great question, Alok. So for example, so this is just like an IDE that can build any application. So we have built massive applications for financial companies, ERPs for manufacturing facilities. We have a complete patient management system for a large healthcare company in the US. We have built billing systems. An Indian company built a billing system for a US health insurance company. I think for the Qatar, the state government of Oman is building stuff for their medical services board. So we have a wide range of applications. So I'm going to open up something that I'm familiar with insurance. So I'll open up a fairly complex application. So here is a extremely complex insurance application that manages flood insurance in the U.S. for a huge government agency. So here is a login screen, for instance. And you'll see the first time it takes a few seconds to build. Here's a login screen that we designed, a quote screen that we have designed. So here's a complex screen that has been designed. And the logic behind that quote button, when you click that button, here's the flow chart that it calls. And if you look at it, it gets more and more complex as you look at the business logic behind that's been written. So does that answer your question, Alok?
Yes, it does. And it can be present across multiple users through a cloud?
Yes. So yes, it builds a extremely robust web applications. So for example, this flood insurance application is nothing but a web application that can be deployed anywhere on the cloud. So multiple end users can log in. This tool, the platform itself can be installed in all the developers that you have in your team. And this, even though this particular project is on my local hard drive, it can be in a source control, so multiple people can work on this project. This particular project itself, this one's generates about 300 lines of code. We have the Department of Defense in the US. We build a massive application for them. It generates 6 million lines of code. And that generated code is also when you build all your project, and which I didn't show you yet, and which probably will continue and finish off, or you can look at it through our tutorials. If I went in here and I did this build, it actually generates the code in your local app data, and the code actually stays in here. You can actually open up the code. For example, this, find rate table. This is the generated code. And you can look at the quality of the generated code when you build it. So does that answer your question? I guess I gave you a few more things.
No, it is fabulous. I appreciate your very sharp, concise summaries. Thank you. That was precise.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alok. Do you have the questions coming?
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
So I think we'll go ahead with the explanation. We have 5 more minutes. Do you have any other questions, or we can extend it for some time until we finish this project?
Yeah. So when you're in a project and you want to go back to another project, you click on this logo. It takes you to the screen. You click open. And I have a lot of projects, so it took a few seconds. But we go look for that Incubate Hub project. So we open up the project that we are working on. It opens the project. So now we were at the last time we stopped. We set the screen to be in Hindi. Now let's see how we can handle the click event of the calculate button. Here are the properties of the calculate button. The way when I opened up, it looked like this. For me to, instead of opening and finding out where the calculate button is, I push the control key on my keyboard and I click on the element on the screen. It takes you to that element here and shows you the properties. One of the properties here is form to submit. It shows you all the forms in the screen. I add that form. That means all these fields will be submitted when I click the calculate button. And if you see on click here, there's an add behavior. So when I click on the add behavior, it creates a flowchart for me, just like when we click add behavior in the entity on the buttons on click, we have a flowchart. So when you click the button, this flowchart gets called. So here, if you look at the start shape, it actually brought those 3 fields as inputs to me, and it's figured out the data type since it knew what type of a field I had it. However, you can change this to another data type, and Graphite will automatically cast it into an integer from a decimal and update it for you. And when I save this, notice how I did a destructive change, decimal to an integer. Graphite does a complete impact analysis. And in this case, it said it's the flowchart that you're working on, only that's going to be affected. So I'm going to push continue. So what do I want to do when the click button is called? I want to call that calculate simple interest flowchart. So to call one flowchart from another flowchart, you use this shape. So it's calling a method from another method. I double click on it. I click interest, which is the object that I put the behavior in. Then it shows me all the behaviors or all the public methods in that object. So I choose that. It shows me what inputs it's expecting and what data types they are, which is fine because we have those in our inputs to this behavior, and I pass those. So basically what I've done here is I say var interest calculate simple interest equals interest.calculate simple interest, open bracket, duration field, comma, principal field, comma, rate field, close bracket, semicolon. That's all I've done here in terms of generated code. What's cool is business analysts get to see this and understand what's going on instead of looking at code. As developers, you have complete power that you have with regular coding, but now you are providing a better benefit to your client or to your team. So once I call that, my next job is to access the output. So this variable dot outputs dot new interest, and we know new interest as a property called amount, and take that and put it in this heading, right? Sorry, I hope, okay. So by the way, if you do Control Tab, it shows you all the open windows. So here, in order to update the page from within a flow chart, we have something called the page instruction. Page instruction has a lot of different features. You can write more page instructions that you can call and write JavaScript to support the page instruction, which we will see in future webinars. So here I want to update the value on the screen. I want to update an element. I want to update the value of an element on the screen. And my element is interest heading. And I got the results of the previous flow chart. I take the amount out of that new interest output variable and put it into that heading. I click OK. And I can end the shape or end it or save it. So let me just save the output into the database. So all I have to do is just do that. And that saves the interest object to the database when we create the database. And I'm going to push end. So we have pretty much completed our application. Let's go build. Since we only have like, sorry, we are out of time, but if you bear with me, I'm going to create an environment, build, and show this application. So here's the environment. I'm going to do add environment. I will call it deploy or dev deploy. I'm going to do SQL Server authentication, database name. Local host. That's just a website name. I'm going to make it default and public. Click OK. Now if I go to the sidebar and go to build, it actually lets me go do a build. Now when I do this build, Graphite, what Graphite's doing is actually it is generating the code behind the scenes. So there's Incubate Hub, there's Calculator, there's the build. So I highly suggest purge previous builds when you do a build because it fills up your hard drive quick with all these different builds. So here is C#. Here is all the Graphite Studio, Visual Studio projects that will be generated. The web one contains all your web pages and your JavaScript, and your model project contains all your backend logic. So for example, you can open this up in Visual Studio, but because of time, I'm going to simply open it up on Notepad++. Here's your business logic, and the comments that you found in the shape shows up in the generated code. So you absolutely have the most perfect code that's generated. In release mode, this last step takes 40 seconds because it obfuscates and compresses the JavaScript, and that compression algorithm takes 40 seconds. Now I can surf to this web page, but before that, I'm going to create the database. So if I go to the settings, there are a couple of things I'm going to do in settings apart from creating the database. So first, let's create the database. So if I go to the database and I click on update database, it will generate the database. If you already add the database, this regenerate will be set to no. Optimize will actually go look at all your data loads and generate the right indexes for performance. So So now it's actually connecting to SQL Server and creating that database that we named as IncubateDB. Another thing that I'm going to do that you guys don't have to worry about for 30 days is go to this license tab and extend my trial, because I want to also be like everybody else out there using the platform. I also lose, my license expires every 30 days. So I extend trial. So, and this license goes by projects, by each project. So I wait for this dialog to pop up. I click confirm and then I click OK. So this license, like I mentioned, is for each project. So you have to extend every project by for every 30 days in trial mode. So click OK. I'm going to also do another build, this time in debug mode, so I can show you the speed. So for that, I'm going to go back to settings, go to debug, switch this to debug mode on. That doesn't mean you're going to be debugging. To actually debug, we'll have to switch on the debug session. I'm going to click OK. I can purge the previous builds or simply build another one. And you'll notice in this one, the last section is super fast because it's not compressing the JavaScript. Here's the application that we built. Obviously, it's warming up the app pool, so it's going to take a few seconds. And there's your web page. So here I do 5,000, maybe 5.5, 9, and push calculate. One other thing that I wanted to show. So right now it's actually calculating the simple interest and storing it in the database. So let's go to SQL Server Management Studio. Again, Graphite connects to SQL Server Express. So you can download SQL Server Express and pretty much build the application. We called our database Incubate Hub. Here is the table. And there's the row that we just calculated. And you can look at the details of the data model and stuff like that. So let's say if I did 6.5%, you'll notice the speed is instantaneous. So performance of the applications built by Graphite, not only is the code quality absolutely perfect, the performance, all of the things that you have to worry about are taken care of by Graphite. So you only worry about the business logic. A couple of other things. So let's say we wanted to debug the calculate simple interest flowchart, and I'll show you debugging and then we'll stop the meeting. So if I wanted to debug this flowchart, I set a breakpoint here, and then I go back to settings, and I switch on a debug session. So I go back to the debug tab. It shows me what behaviors are listed for debug. I start a session. I click OK. Now if I push calculate, it jumps into Graphite, and there's a glow around the start shape. So execution has stopped at this particular shape. If I click on the eyeglasses, it shows me all the variables in context. As you expected, new interest is null or empty, as we call it. Here we are creating new interest, right? We're creating new interest. So when I step over that, you will see that new interest got its memory, and we set its 3 properties up. So you can pretty much step through your code, and if you don't want to, you can push continue, and it'll come back here. With that, I'll stop the webinar, open it up for questions. I have the time, or we can meet up back in the next webinar, look at more complex concepts.
Yeah, hi folks. If you have any questions, we have 5 more minutes. I hope we are okay with 5 more minutes. If you have questions, we can ask. Chris is here with us.
Alok here. I again have a question. Everything was
Sure.
to do with numbers. Can it also handle images?
Yes, absolutely. So here, Alok, and let me know, Sagar, send my email to Alok. If he wants to have a separate call to just deep dive the product, I can also show you. So Alok, you have
Sure.
upload control in Graphite. You can upload images. So let me open up a more complex, that same complex project that I opened up. So here we go, Franklin NFIP. NFIP, in fact, stands for National Flood Insurance Program. So here, if I go in here and if I go to resources, and choose, and you can make these images. I didn't even talk about theming, but here's a background image that I uploaded. Here's a logo I uploaded. And when in my login screen, I added what's called a page display area, which is a display area widgets, which is available here. And one of the properties here is background. Background, you can put an image. And in this image, I chose that background I uploaded. That shows up here. So that's a static image. Now Graphite, let's say you wanted to upload profile images. Graphite has upload control. For example, here in this particular mode dialog box, I have this upload control that I dragged and dropped. And you can handle on the upload, you will get that uploaded image as base 64. You can save it as a file on disk. You can save it as a file store in database, or you can simply take its base 64 content and put it in a column. Does that answer your question, Alok?
Yes, it does. Sagar, I look forward to Chris's email ID.
So pretty much everything you can do in any business application can be done with Graphite. So the question 99.9% of the time, well, let's say 90% of the time, Alok, the question will be, yes, we can do that in Graphite. Here's how you do it. Now, even if you can't do it in Graphite, you can go write code, right, in Graphite, and you can go into this external reference and actually add a DLL and then call the methods from the DLL within your flowchart. Does it make sense?
Right, it does. Great.
Okay. Anyone else have questions?
Any more questions? Else we'll close the session now. Have any more questions again? Yeah. Okay. I think there's no more questions
Sagar,
now.
if I can just close with one thing.
Yeah, please.
I apologize. So just like any tool that you use to build software, Graphite has a learning curve. That learning curve is very, very small. So within a week, you kind of will understand what Graphite does. Within 2 weeks, you will know all the concepts behind Graphite. What we are finding is if you're already a developer, within a month or so, you become really good with Graphite. But if you're a completely new person to development, within 2 to 2.5 months, you become a very good programmer. Thank you, son.
Great. Okay, thank you, guys. You can connect with me for any clarifications. We have a chatbot in our portal, or I'm dropping my email ID here as well. You can connect with me for any clarifications on Studio or in the challenge as well. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris, for joining. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you. I know.
Thank you, guys.